Good morning, everyone. This is Jack Bray. I'll be moderating today's webinar, and we'll be getting started very shortly, within the next couple minutes. In the meantime, we are going to be putting a question up on the screen about what inspired you to start your career in the pulp and paper industry. And we'd love it if all participants would please answer that question. We will try to get the feedback to you at the appropriate time following the webinar, but we'd love to hear from you about what inspired you to start your career in this industry. So thank you, and we'll be back with you very shortly. Okay, hello everyone. We're ready to get started today, and just another reminder that there's still time to answer the question we have on the very opening page of this webinar about what inspired you to start a career in the pulp and paper industry. We're starting to get some responses to that, and it's everything from being offered a scholarship to I lived in a paper mill town. But we'd love to hear back from you on this, and again, we'll try to get this feedback out to you following the webinar. But I want to welcome everybody to the first in the Leadership Webinar Series presented to you by the Young Professionals of the TAPPI Division. A special thanks to International Paper and Georgia Pacific for their sponsorship of this event. The purpose of this series is to give high-quality education and training to the next generation of leaders joining the forest products industry globally, and actually all those industries that are allied and aligned with TAPPI. Today's topic is moving past generational differences. My name is Jack Bray, and I've been in this industry for over 38 years. And this topic has a special interest to me. Most of those years in the industry, I was in a mill setting, in a variety of mills, in the different positions and so forth. The last several years of my career, I was in a corporate setting as a manufacturing executive. So I've been able to see generational differences play out in the workplace, again, in a variety of settings, in a variety of circumstances. My own personal story is back when I started in the industry, I went to work for mostly people from the World War II generation or the traditionalist group. And I really enjoyed working with them and for them. This was a group with a very high work ethic, very strong work ethic. their communications were very crisp, very clear. They seemed to say a lot with very few words, and they were very goal-oriented, and I really enjoyed that. Having said that, there were some people in that generation who sometimes felt that baby boomers were a little entitled, or perhaps we weren't wanting to work as hard to get in our career where the other generations had gotten to. And so you could sometimes feel that play out in the workplace. So again, this has special interest for me. My takeaway from that is there has always been generational differences in the workplace. I think there is a variety of reasons that really profile this topic now, maybe compared to other years, other generations. I think two of those reasons really stand out for me. One of them is technology. Technology has changed so much of how we get work done in the workplace, and in particular, communications. It has really impacted that. The second reason is we do have quite an exodus of baby boomers out of the workplace. We have a 10 to 15 year span where there are a lot of people leaving the workplace from the boomer generation, and it is putting people from the younger generations in leadership positions much sooner than I think other generations had to deal with. And so that's some good news. I think people are really moving into leadership positions much more quickly today. But the bad news is perhaps some of the preparation for that is not there, and some of the experiences are not quite as available. So again, there's a lot of reasons that this topic is front and center, but I think those are two that stand out. We have a couple learning objectives for today. I want to share them with you. First of all, we have hopefully prepared a very solution-oriented and proactive webinar for you today. First learning objective is that we have provided some tools and tips in this webinar, and we're really hoping that the participants in this webinar today can find ways to use these and implement the best practices of communication when working with other generations. The second objective really is to have a broader discussion around the ideas and embrace the differences in values and expectation of each generation. I think if we can all agree that having differences in the workplace is a positive thing, as it brings that many more ideas to the forefront, it brings that many more solutions, possible solutions to problem solving and issues. And if we can view generational differences as just one more category of those differences that can bring a positive element to the workplace, then maybe we can have our paradigm wrapped around that this can be a positive difference that we experience. I want to thank again our sponsors for this leadership series of Georgia Pacific and International Paper. We really appreciate their support in this effort. We are very fortunate today to have a variety of presenters with us. These people have a variety of backgrounds in the pulp and paper industry and are going to be sharing some thoughts, some experiences, and some tools with us today. So we have Kelly Dare of Georgia Pacific with us today, who will be acting as our content expert. We have 4 people from the Domtar Kingsport, Tennessee mill. And they are Ron Neusman, who is the mill manager at the Kingsport mill. And he'll be a part of the best practice panel, as well as introducing the other participants. And then we have 3 young professionals that work at Kingsport. They are Peyton Clifton, Noah Walker, and Bradley Harris, who are going to be sharing with us some of the tools and some of the practices that Kingsport uses to build team and to help move past generational differences. And then myself, and again, I'll be acting as the moderator today. A couple more items. Today's webinar has really been put together and led by Shannon Warshawski of TAPPI, who has worked hard in the background trying to pull today's efforts together. I have one housekeeping item, and that is all participants in this webinar will be on mute. And in fact, you'll be on mute for the whole session. So we ask that you use the question box should be on the right-hand side of your screen, and use your keyboard to key in any questions, any comments, anything needed for clarity. We will be receiving them, and we'll be trying to handle these during the webinar or in the Q&A session we have designed at the end of today. And just one last comment on that. These kind of experiences are always better when there's a lot of interaction. So we really encourage you to ask questions, ask for any clarity, make comments, and it'll be helpful to the whole process. So before we begin into the meat of our topic, we have our first poll question today. We have a few poll questions designed in today's webinar. So our first poll question will be coming up. And we would ask all participants, please, to answer this if you would. Okay? And it simply asks, what year were you born in? And these years kind of follow the generational makeups of the different generations that work in our workplace. And we're just very interested in the demographics of who we have joining the participants today on this webinar. So if you would, please answer this. We will we'll pause for just a little bit, and we'll try to get some real-time results in this so that everybody will be able to see the demographics. Okay, so we do have some results in, and as we can see, we have a great deal of people responding that were born in the years 77 through 94, so maybe not so surprising. Having said that, we do have the second most people joining are from the baby boomer generation, 46 through 64, so I think this is good news. We have kind of a wide or diverse set of generations joining our webinar today. Very glad to have that. It'll help with the different perspectives, and thank you very much for answering that. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kelly Dare, who's going to discuss some perspectives and tips on generational differences. Kelly?
Thanks, Jack. Like Jack mentioned, my name is Kelly Dare, and I'm a Human Resources Manager for Georgia Pacific. I've worked for this company for 6.5 years and at 3 different paper mills. Just a little preface, I am from the millennial generation. So as we're talking through these things, I just want everyone to know that I've been in your shoes. I know what it feels like to try to overcome these generational differences. And as we start today, I think one of the most important things that we have got to remember is that it is okay to be different. We value diversity. With diversity comes creative thinking, more opportunities for innovation, and more opportunities for creativity. Therefore, I always encourage people when you're working on any project or any sort of assignment to make sure you have a diverse work group. Put tenured employees with newer employees together so that way you can have people with past practice knowledge, cultural knowledge, things like that. And then the newer generation tends to bring more technological information and that sort of information to the table, and that will help you come to the best outcome. In our engineering development program, which is our largest entry-level program that Georgia Pacific has, we try to always be very mindful and thoughtful of that. When we place those younger employees at mills, one of the things we always tell the supervisors, make sure you pair them up with people from all different generations and all different experiences, because that will help develop them. It'll help them have a well-rounded experience, but also it will allow them to bring their new knowledge and their new ideas to a greater part of the mill or to whatever facility that they're working at. Diversity also reduces the risk of groupthink and limited creativity. The more minds you have in the room with different backgrounds and experiences, the more ideas that you will have. And another thing that we think is so important about diversity is that it helps us anticipate customers' needs. That's one of the things we're always focused on is our customers' needs. We want to make sure we meet them, but more importantly, we want to anticipate what they want and we want to give it to them before they even know to ask for it. And I think that's where newer and younger generations can really come into play. Now that the newer generation is in the workforce, you are now our customers and our consumers. So you know what you want, and if you want it, I would say most people in your generation are looking for the same thing. So bring those ideas forwards in meetings. If you're in any sort of product development meetings, or even if you're not, feel free to share those ideas because you know what you're looking for, not only right now, but next in the future. As Jack mentioned, every generation has different things it brings to the table. And one of the things I always think of with, the millennial generation, my generation, and the generation behind us is technology. It's rapidly evolving. It's coming faster than we've ever seen. And we grew up in a time where we didn't know anything but technology. We've had cell phones and smartphones and things since we were very, very little. And other generations may not have had that. So I think that's one of the things that we need to leverage when we talk about newer and younger generations is their ability to use and maintain and bring forth new technology. They grew up with it, they tend to know how to use it faster, and they're more willing to learn and go out and experiment, I think, than perhaps some other people. So that's definitely something we like to remind everyone as they're working with newer and younger employees to make sure they leverage that. Another thing to remember is to always put yourself in somebody else's shoes. One of the things I often remind supervisors of newer employees is just to remember you had a first day on the job too. So no matter what generation you came into in the workforce, you had a first day. Just be mindful that this could be their first job they've ever had. They may have relocated to a new city. They don't know anyone. They don't know anybody at work. They don't know what they're doing. So be patient with them and just be patient because they are going to ask you a lot of questions. They don't know what they don't know, and that's okay. And it is our job to teach them and give them that information. And also to the newer and younger employees, be patient as well. Sometimes we work in very fast-paced environments and people may forget to take the time to kind of sit down and talk with you. So if you're not getting what you need from your supervisor or from any of the other people you're working with, just set up a meeting with them or take time and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you a little more one-on-one. I'm kind of struggling a little bit. I need some more help since I am so new. One of the most important things to overcoming generational barriers and gaps is to communicate. If we don't talk to each other, we're not going to get to know each other and we're not going to be able to move past that. So communication is key. One of the ways to get to know your people is find a common interest. One of the things I always think of is sports. I would say a majority of people are interested in some sort of sports team or sports activity. That's an easy way to find some common ground. If you're sitting in a room, you may be the youngest person in the room, start talking about whatever soccer game, football, baseball, whatever game was on this weekend. I guarantee you that will be a conversation starter. So most important thing, find a common interest, then you'll find commonality, and that's how you guys will start to form a working relationship and overcome those barriers. On the slides, as you can see, here's some other questions that you can possibly ask your coworkers to get to know them. A lot of people enjoy talking about their work experience and enjoy talking about their past history. So feel free to ask them questions about it. What was your first job here? What did your career track look like? How did things used to work? What was the culture like? What sort of changes have you seen? Those kind of questions will lead to some really good conversations, and you may learn something new in those course of those conversations that you didn't know before. Another very important thing for the younger generation, or for anybody, is to remember that change is uneasy. As humans, we are wired to feel uncomfortable about change. So when it comes to change, everybody just needs to be patient with each other. So for the newer and younger generation, I will say most of your frustrations will come with technology changes and automation and things along those lines. You need to be patient. Remember, you grew up in an era where we always had cell phones, the latest and greatest cell phones and constant technological upgrades. Other generations didn't have that, and it could be uneasy for them. It's intimidating. So be patient and don't try to force it upon them. When I have these conversations quite often with our younger engineers because they want to come in and put all new sorts of technology and automation into place, but they may not necessarily get the buy-in from the employees they're working with. So I always remind them to be patient. This is all new to them, and don't force it. If you try to force it, it's not going to work. People do not like to have change forced upon them, but instead show them a little bit at a time. So take a little bit and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what it looks like. And set up a couple meetings and work through it. And the biggest thing is to tie in, how is it beneficial to them? How will it make their job more efficient? How will it make it easier? You have to relate it to them or else it won't work. So to keep in mind with the communications piece, we always want to make sure we engage others and make sure that everyone's voice is heard. And one of the ways you can do that is to host joint knowledge shares. So a knowledge share could be for problem solving, or it could be to share best practices. So we use both knowledge shares for both of those scenarios in our company. And when we do that, we want to make sure we have people of all different ages and levels of experience in the room. One of the advantages to having a knowledge share is that everybody hears the same thing at the same time. So it reduces the game of telephone. So if you have one person in the meeting, they go out and tell their people, and by the time it gets to the last person, we all know the story changes. So this allows everyone to get the same information at the same time. And more importantly, if you're working on problem solving, you can break down the issues in real time. So you can come forward to a meeting and say, this is what's happening right now, we need to solve it, versus maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month later, and it may not be as effective. And again, just as a reminder, seek to understand your coworkers, even if they think differently from you. Everybody is probably going to think differently than you do, and that's okay. That's why we value diversity. That's why we want to make sure when we have focus groups, we want to have a mixture of people who are in the room, because everybody has something to offer and bring to the table. And then make sure you share your findings with their leadership to help champion improvement opportunities and celebrate that success. And just remember, management or whoever may not always come to you looking for new ideas or things like that. You may have to go to them. So don't feel intimidated because you're new. Don't feel intimidated because you are young. Just remember, you got this job and you were hired because we believed that you could do it. So feel free to go forward and set up meetings and present new ideas. As you're presenting new ideas, please remember they may not always go through, and there's a reason for that. So don't get discouraged if you bring an idea forward and for whatever reason, the mill doesn't decide to take your idea. That's okay. Don't let that stop you. Keep bringing forward new ideas, because at some point we will be able to implement one of those. And lastly, don't forget to be respectful when we're doing all of this. There will be times you will disagree, and it'll be frustrating because people aren't listening to you or you can't get their buy-in for technology, but just be respectful and remember to be patient. And the more you talk about it, the better it's going to be. Thanks, Jack. I'm going to send it back to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it very much. I really liked Kelly's point about being intentional. If we always view diversity as important when we get work teams together, when we go to solve problems, even small teams of just a few people. We need to look at generational differences in that same light when we're putting together teams and so forth, because we won't do ourselves any favors by doing an end run. We really need to embrace the differences and really get more comfortable with one another. And so I think that whole idea of being intentional in that matter is very important. So coming up next, we have our Kingsport team, but before we do that, we have our second poll question coming up. Okay, and here's our second poll question. And again, I would ask everybody participating today to please answer this, and we'll show the results when we get enough results in. But it's we're just interested in what is the primary form of communication with your supervisor. And you see that you have 5 points there. Please just answer one of those, and we'll take at the results real time. We'll wait a few seconds, and then we'll take a look at the results. Okay, so we have the results in, and as we can see, informal face-to-face chats are really the primary form of communication. Interestingly enough, email comes in second. And I guess my only viewpoint on this is I'm happy to see the informal face-to-face come up with such a high number as the primary form of communication. And the reason is simply this: all forms of communication are good. We have so many different ways to communicate than when I joined the industry. However, I think one thing that we all eventually learn, there's nothing that can replace a good face-to-face conversation, particularly with tricky issues. It's the only way to get full context. It's the only way to read body language and other nonverbal signs. And, I think we've all been in a situation where we're asking somebody if they're having a good day or how things are going, and oh yeah, as a reply, things are going well, but you can really tell from the body language or other cues that maybe it's not going as well. It's hard to get that from other ways of communicating. So, there's really nothing replacing face-to-face chats or scheduled face-to-face for really understanding full context. Okay, so thank you for answering that poll question, and now we'll move on to the Kingsport team. I think you'll enjoy this panel. They are going to talk about specific tools that they use at the Kingsport mill to help build team and move past generational differences. And I'm going to turn it over to Ron Nussman, the mill manager. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and introduce his team. So, Ron?
Thanks, Jack. Again, my name's Ron Nussman, the mill manager at Kingsport Mill here. I've been here, just a little background, I've been here 28 years. Just recently named the mill manager, or interim mill manager. Prior to that, had 28 years as a mill controller. Kingsport Mill has been in city Kingsport for about 100 years, and as Jack mentioned, I think we're similar to a lot of mills out there where we have gone through the demographics where we're losing the baby boomers and hiring new generation of young leaders. And with that, I've got three good leaders here. I got Noah Walker, Peyton Clifton, and Bradley Harris is going to talk about some of the things we're doing. So some of the things we're doing to help bridge the gap in relationship is frontline problem solving and application of the frontline problem solving techniques. We're doing tech talks where a more experienced engineer is talking to our young engineers about the real life things that go on in the mill. We have individual and team projects for co-ops, interns, and the young professionals, and we have a mentorship program. With that, I'll turn that over to Noah to talk about the frontline problem solving.
All right, so when it comes to frontline problem solving, it's really a skill that's not so much taught in the college classroom, yet it's used in almost any industry, especially in paper. So when we bring on a young professional, whether it's a co-op or a new hire, we want to formally train them in frontline problem solving using several different methods. Those methods include the A blocker, which is a Domtar specific method, the 5 whys diagram, as well as the fishbone diagram, which are used across all industries. So when we train our young professionals in problem solving or frontline problem solving, we're just not training them in, I guess, a how to or how to participate. We're training them how to lead these sessions so they can make an impact and a difference in our mill as well as others. And so a good example of this was in the summer of 2017. We actually had our group of co-ops lead a summer-long frontline problem-solving session on our contractor safety training as well as our new hire safety training, which produced some great results. So by training young professionals in frontline problem-solving, you're not only giving them, I guess, a skill set they can use for the rest of their career, but you're also giving them the ability to step into leadership roles and to be seen by their mill employees as a valuable asset for any type of situation when it comes to problem solving. And I'll pass it on to Peyton Clifton.
So a program that we started about 3 years ago here at our mill in Kingsport is the Tech Talk program. This is a program that was designed by engineers here at the mill, and the purpose of the course is to serve as a bridge between a college classroom setting, a more theory-oriented classroom setting, and the actual day-to-day technical issues that we face in our mill. So just to give you an example, some of the topics that we cover in the course are welding, electrical and DCS controls. We talk about pumps and filtration, piping and valves, just everyday, day-to-day type of issues that we face in the mill. We cover those in the course. So the course is made up of 18 one-hour classroom sessions. And so typically what we'll do is we'll get a subject matter expert or someone in the mill who's very familiar with a certain process will come and give the talk for that week. And so, for example, Noah's an electrical engineer, so Noah and our other electrical engineers might come and talk about electrical engineering or controls that we have in the mill during the week. So after we do our session in the classroom, we'll actually follow that up on the Friday of that week by going out into the field and actually laying our eyes on what we just talked about in our tech talk for that week. So that might be anything from going and scoping out different valves that we've got in the mill. It might be going to look at different processes we have, different types of pumps, and even last year we had an opportunity to go back and actually do some hands-on welding. So that was a really great experience. The program is designed for our entry-level engineers as well as our co-ops and interns go through that as well during the summer. So here is a picture here of when we went out in the field and we're doing some hands-on welding after we had talked about welding that week. So that was a great experience for our interns. So also coming out of our Tech Talk program, we like to have our engineer who has gone through the Tech Talk program to actually lead the Tech Talk program for the next year. So for example, I've been through the program when I interned here at the Kingsport Mill 3 times. I went through that program. And so this past summer, now that I'm full-time employed with the company, I was actually able to lead the Tech Talk program for our interns this summer. So a great leadership opportunity as well coming out of this program. And then just to wrap up, it provides basic industrial information as it relates to our industry. And it's really just built to equip our young professionals with lingo, tools of the trade, and equipment that we use that you're not learning in a classroom setting. And now I'll turn it over to Bradley Harris.
Thank you, Peyton. So I'm going to be talking about the different projects that we set up for our co-ops and interns whenever they come in to our mill. And so looking at our projects that we had for last summer, one thing that we really focus on is trying to make sure that our projects are value added, not only for the mill, but also for the co-op or the intern, because no one wants to come to a co-op or an internship and just file papers. And we believe that also. We don't want you to come to our mill and not have anything to be able to go back to school and not brag about all the cool projects that you got to do for the summer. So we really focus on not only value added for you, but also value added for us, and giving you projects that are going to help improve our process here at the mill and just improve our day-to-day operations. So like Noah touched upon, the team project for our co-ops last summer was working on a safety training program here. So that involved working on computer programming for the contractor safety. So that way it was a lot better. It was a lot more user-friendly and easier to use, and more comprehensive without being too detail-oriented. There was the new hire process that we worked on, which was streamlining what a new hire here at the mill goes through whenever they are first coming to the mill. And we were also looking at network file management, but that ended up being out of scope of the project, so we were no longer able to pursue that. In terms of individual projects, that was the tank project for the paper mill, looking at just different kinds of ways you could look at those tanks. The SBC for mill-wide controls, and then the testing of pulping residuals. All those were completed projects by interns in the summer of 2017. So like I was kind of saying, Team projects and individual projects for the co-ops and interns gives our young professionals the opportunity to work closely with other employees and mill leadership and to gain insight and experience while addressing important situations and developing important relationships. So this statement touches upon another big part of what we want to focus on with our projects, which is we want you to be able to meet and build relationships with other people in the mill while you're here. We don't want you to just be in a corner office somewhere and not talking to anyone. We want you to help. We want you to build those relationships while you're here because we're looking at you for the future also, and we want you to be able to have an impact while you're here. And a lot of that leads into our mentoring program for our entry-level engineers and the new hires we have. So entry-level engineers are assigned to a mentor upon being hired by our mill. And what this means is one-on-one coaching sessions with someone who's a senior leader and then the entry-level engineer. The goal is to meet about once a month, and we like for the mentor to be someone outside of the normal department. So that way you're able to talk candidly with that person, and they can also give you insight at different parts of the mill that maybe you don't have an experience with. And so the questions that you're asking your mentor are about the facility in general, about the company, just different ideas and things that the entry-level engineer might have questions about, whether that's the career path that that specific person took or any advice they have in terms of growing as a young professional. So continued on, we like to think of an individual development plan, and that's kind of what the mentor helps the mentee work on. You know, as an entry-level engineer, you might have goals and visions for where your future is going to go and where you want to go. So your mentor is to help guide you on that path where you want to go, what steps they think you might need to take to get to where you want to be in 5 years, and to help coach you on different issues and to help you learn how to conduct important meetings. Because if you're going to become a future leader at this mill, we want you to know kind of how to properly conduct meetings, and you need to know how to address different issues. And then your mentor can also give you feedback on how you're doing at the mill. You run down a list of the projects that you've completed since your last meeting, and they can give you feedback on how they think those projects ended up doing. So I'm going to pass it on over to Ron.
So that's some of the things we're doing here in Kingsport. You know, similar to what Kelly mentioned, the overall theme of a lot of these processes and tasks and activities we're doing is, you know, basically being intentional about getting our young leaders out into the mill and out working in teams with a diverse work group, fostering that communication to go on between the different groups, providing opportunities for them to lead and develop things, and providing some on real life tasks or real life learning experiences that maybe you wouldn't learn in college, and you have someone who's been around that is teaching those things and intentional about making those things happen. Some of the challenges we face, you know, getting the senior leadership to understand the importance of connecting with the young professionals and helping them bridge that gap and taking on this mentor relationship and helping develop and grow the young professionals, not only in their areas, but in other areas. Then also just making sure we get good job assignments to our young engineers. It's real easy in a day-to-day battle in a mill where you're fighting the latest and greatest problem of the day to assign more administrative routine type tasks to the entry-level engineers, and be able to stay above that, and as a supervisor or as a leader in that organization, help get those ELEs out exposed to the real world problems and not doing so much administrative duties. Those are the big challenges we face. And lastly, the one thing we do is a lot of the recruiting we do end up bringing folks in from outside the area. Kingsport's in northeast part of Tennessee, a city of about 40,000 folks. So a lot of recruiting's done where we're bringing engineers and young professionals outside the area. So we're real intentional about getting them involved in the community, and those are some of the things that they do. And that not only gets them involved with the team doing things, but gets them in the day with the community and dealing with the community, and as well as the demographics of our community is a lot like what we have in the mill, where the baby boomers as the majority of our folks out there, and the majority of the folks involved in the community activities. So it helps bridge that gap as well. So Jack, I'll turn it back over to you. That's what we have for Kingsport.
Great. Thank you very much to the Kingsport team. That was really a good coverage of some very practical tools you guys use. I have to comment that I really love the part about the tech talks, because it's a great example, and that, of course, Kingsport is a mill setting, but you can also do this in a corporate setting or any office setting. Provide a forum where any generation can be up in front of a class being a leader, and any generation can be in the class being a learner. I think in one of our discussions with Kingsport, they shared with me in the welding class that of course, really none of the young professionals had welding experience. So you had an experienced welder of an older generation talking to a class of young professionals. However, when it would come to advanced technology, perhaps process controls, you could see where that would be flipped. So again, the whole point is creating a forum where each generation can demonstrate leadership and also the ability to participate and learn in the whole thing. So now we're going to go back to Kelly for more discussion on tools and tips for moving past generational differences. So Kelly?
Okay, thanks, Jack. So more tools and tips to move past generational differences and to expand on what Domtar said. We're going to talk a little bit more about mentorship, because I do think that is one of the best ways to work past those generational differences, and because it involves a lot of communication. One thing to remember when it comes to mentorship is everybody needs feedback. So regardless of where you are in your career or how early or maybe toward the end of career, we want feedback, both the positive and the negative. We want to know what we're doing well so we can continue to do that, and we want to know what we're not doing well so we can work on improving that. Mentorship can be formal and informal. So when we talk about a formal mentorship, we assign somebody to you. So when a person comes to work for the first time, we may assign a formal mentor. We'll say, hey, we're going to pair you with so-and-so, and they're going to be your mentor. But then we also highly encourage informal mentorships as well, as sometimes those tend to work better. Informal mentorships are ones that are relationships that just naturally occur while you get to know people and you learn new things and talk to different people in different areas. I know in my experience, actually all of my mentors have been informal mentors, and that was just formed through making phone calls to people who didn't even work at my facility and talking to other people in different departments. So that's one of the things to remember about mentorship, is it doesn't have to be assigned. And maybe you don't get along with your formal mentor, and that's okay. Make sure you go out and form those relationships on your own. I know some of our facilities, when they assign a formal mentorship, they assign 2 mentors. One is a technical mentor, and that is to develop the person's technical skills and teach them about the equipment in the mill. And then they have an other mentor, and that person is there for more career advice, cultural advice, development in their role, and things like that. Remember, you can find mentorship regardless of a person's level in the organization or their job title. A lot of my mentors are my peers. I guess by title, we're on equal level, you could say, or even different titles in different organizations. They have all had work in different places and different experiences, so we can share and I can learn something new from them. Your mentor can be your supervisor, a coworker, or a leader. Your supervisor is naturally going to be a mentor for you. That is their job. Their job is to develop you and get you ready for your next role. However, I always highly encourage people to have mentors outside of their supervisor. There may be times where you have to have a difficult conversation with your supervisor, so you need advice how to have that conversation. And if your supervisor is your only mentor, it's going to be kind of hard to do, since that's the person you need to talk to. And unfortunately, sometimes we may not get along with our supervisors, and you may need to bounce that off somebody else on how do you approach that situation, and you might not feel comfortable doing that, and they can guide you along those paths. Remember, your mentor doesn't necessarily have to be in your department. They don't even have to be at your location. Like I said, all of my mentors are at different locations around the company, and that's okay. And sometimes it's even better because they may have a similar experience, but it may look a little different, and you can learn from each other that way. Mentorships are good because they provide cultural norms, insight to what the facility has been like in the past, where it's going, changes they've seen, certain processes, technical skills, but also for career advice. Again, your supervisor will be having those conversations with you, but sometimes it's nice to get an outside perspective from another person other than your supervisor on what their opinion is about your career and your career path, and maybe the next assignment you should take and different projects you should take on and things like that. Excuse me. And like I mentioned before, it helps build both technical skills and knowledge as well as soft skills. I know some people coming out of school or new employees may have some communication gaps. Just in my experience, that has been kind of what we've seen. And so they've gotten with people who are really good communicators. They lead a lot of presentations, do a lot of public speaking. So they've gone out and sought a mentor specifically for a skill that they thought they were lacking. The ability to build good relationships and engage in others is the heart of leadership success. And I truly believe that, and our newer and younger employees are the future leaders of our organizations. So I do think that's why mentorship is so beneficial. And then I just like to tie everything together about what I talked about with tips and tools for moving past generational differences and mentorship. Just a couple things for all of us to remember. Don't make assumptions based on stereotypes. I think Jack mentioned this at the beginning. Every generation, you can look it up on the internet, has a list of different stereotypes that each generation has. But always remember, just because somebody is in a certain generation does not mean that they necessarily meet all of those stereotypes. So don't assume that just because I'm a millennial, I'm going to act like a millennial in every way as that list says. So make sure you get to know your people first before you make those type of assumptions and judgments. Don't categorize or generalize. I know I sit in many, many meetings where people always talk about, oh, those millennials, and then the whole room looks at me. It's a little uncomfortable. And again, that goes back to what I said before, just because I'm a millennial or you're a millennial or from whatever generation doesn't mean that we act like everything that those things say we do. And by categorizing, I think you automatically put up those barriers. So be intentional about not using necessarily millennials, Gen Z, Gen Y, baby boomers, and things like that. Just refer to them as the young professionals or the more tenured employees. That may help break down some of those barriers. Again, as I mentioned before, always approach everyone with respect, regardless of you agree, disagree on an idea or a problem, and everyone's gonna have a different background. But instead of not respecting that, listen to what people have to say, because you will learn something that you didn't know before. Always approach everything with a positive attitude. It's a lot easier to get along with people and to make forward progress if you have a positive attitude instead of a negative one. And back to what I mentioned in my first presentation, always take interest in others. The key to moving past these generational differences is we have to get to know each other. Move past those stereotypes and the generalizations and get to know the person as a person. And that will help build a stronger relationship, a trusting relationship, and then everybody can work alongside each other much better. And just remember, you can always learn something new. We don't know what we don't know, and we haven't been exposed to everything. So listen to what everyone has to say. Every generation has something to offer when it comes to a learning experience. So just be mindful. And again, you may not agree with everything, but you may learn something new. Thank you, Jack. Back to you.
Great, Kelly. Great points. And I really think the last points were very good. You know, today we did not share with you a list of differences between each generation. We did that on purpose because so much of that has been discussed between the generations. Instead, we really wanted to focus on moving past. And quite frankly, I think you could find more things that bind generations together than drive them apart. I mean, who doesn't value family as an extremely high priority? Who doesn't want to work in a trusting environment? Who doesn't want to be trusted? I mean, if you decided to build a list, I think you could find more that really binds us together. So thank you, Kelly, for that wrap up. And now we're ready for our third poll question. And in fact, our third poll question will deal with mentorship. So here it is. Again, we'd ask all participants to please answer. And the question is, does your company or where you work have a mentoring program? And we're really interested to see the number of people who perhaps have access to that. Because during our wrap up, we have another solution that we'd love to share with the group. So please, if you would, please answer that, and we'll be back in a few seconds to discuss it. Okay. Interesting. The good news is, yes, we have people who are currently being mentored and have some type of a program, or maybe it's mostly informal. That's about half the crowd, but we do have half the people on this webinar that don't have access to that. So I'd like to go to our next slide and share with everyone that TAPPI Connect does in fact have a mentor match program. And the program unites mentors and proteges to help share resources and experience. So if you're a TAPPI member, you can apply. Both the mentors and proteges must apply and then are matched up to work together according to needs and interests. There is some information that you have to provide. And the participants can completely communicate by their own choosing. And the mentoring process is over the course of 6 months and can be extended to meet everybody's needs. There is a bit of a sunrise and sunset to this though. So as you can see, the signups end Sunday, September 30th. That just happened to be coincidental with when we did this webinar. But the main thing here is to let you know there is a place to reach out within TAPPI to get some mentorship if you don't have ready access to it at your place of work. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. And now we'd like to move into our Q&A session. And we thought we would, first of all, another reminder that you can enter in questions using the box you see on the right-hand box, where you can type in a question or a comment. But we do have a question that was queued up during the registration process. And it's this one. As a more senior employee, I try to mentor our younger professionals, but I think it comes across as old war stories and turns some of them off. How can I be more relatable while sharing my experiences and the mistakes I have learned from? So I think what we'll do is maybe we'll have a couple different people share some answers. But Kelly, if you don't mind, I think I'll turn this over to you to give us your perspective on that.
Okay, I do like this question because I think this is a good one. There's nothing wrong with old war stories. However, my advice would be don't just tell them for the sake of telling them. You need to relate it to what the younger professional is going through. So what my advice would be, if you're having a meeting with them, sit down and ask them, what sort of issues are you facing? Do you have any problems or concerns, or even what good experiences have you run into? And then once they tell you something, relate it back to that. You can say things such as, oh, I experienced that when I first started as well, and this is how it happened. That's a way so they don't just feel like you're just constantly telling them stories about the good old days or anything like that. It will help them realize, hey, my supervisor's been in my shoes before. They understand what I'm going through, but also they may have just given you a piece of advice and a solution to a problem by telling you that story. So that's my advice there, is make sure you relate it to something that they're currently working on or currently facing.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And Ron, do you mind if I pass this one on to you as well? Since you're a boomer, maybe you can give us your perspective on this.
Sure. I think from my perspective, I think it all comes down to similar to what Kelly says, where you talk and have a conversation and you try to relate it back to that individual's experience. And, it's real easy to glorify the good old days and those kinds of things. But I would talk more about the situation you experienced and how you're trying to relate that to an individual's experience and what their problem they're working on at that given time. So it means something to them, then I would try to deal with more with what you learned from that experience and how those learnings could be passed on to that individual you're talking to, as opposed to all the stress you went through, all the headaches you went through, and how you turned out to be a hero to solve that problem. Get away from that and just what problem solving skills and what kind of techniques you learned from that you could pass on to the person you're talking to. And I think one of these three probably would have a different perspective coming from a different generation. So Noah, what are your thoughts?
I guess mine are a lot similar to Kelly's. I mean, you want your information to be, when you're telling young professionals, be practical, rather than talk about just how tough, it used to be back in the day or how good it used to be. so like Cody was saying, to find projects or something that you've worked on before as well, and maybe you can give them some tips of, hey, this is how we troubleshooted a certain valve or got past that certain issue. So I think it all just relates to finding practical information that's helpful to the young professional.
Great. Thanks, guys. That's good. Just to add in a quick comment too, I think whenever you find yourself in a kind of a teaching moment and so forth, I think it's always important to remember like 2 or 3 bullets of what you're really trying to accomplish. And it really starts with the thing that you want to teach someone. And if you can deliver that first, I'd like to share this with you because this is what I learned from it. And try to keep yourself to a few succinct bullet points. Then hopefully through that process, you actually try to draw that other person out through Q&A. So it doesn't come across so much as a lecture either. But really appreciate your viewpoints on that. So we have another question, and this one looks like it comes probably somebody from the boomer generation. I have young engineers in my department that do not want a shift supervisor experience, but yet that can be some of the best development for someone wanting to grow in mill leadership roles. How can we build more interest in this? Will the young people ever want to do shift work to get the experience? Okay, good question. And so maybe let me throw this one to the Kingsport team. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'll take this one, Jack. Obviously, I think when we start talking about shift supervisor positions, the obvious turnoff there for the young generation is the shift work. Working a rotating shift is not desirable to young professionals. And so I think one of the ways that this can be overcome is when you're presenting a shift supervisor position to a young engineer, you really need to take the time and sit down with them and define, how long of a stint is this shift supervisor position going to be? How long are you going to be working shift work? Make a definitive end on that, or maybe say, at this date, we'll get back together and see how things are going. If you'd like to progress more in that position, or if we'd like to transition you to a different position. And then also, while you're talking with the young professional, lay out a career path with them. Talk about how this is going to help them, how this is going to be a stepping stone, and how they can use this as leverage to move up, to more leadership positions that are higher up. And so I think it's really important to sit down and have a well-defined plan and scope of work that the young professional, how long you're going to be going through shift work, and how can this help us in the future? How is this going to leverage you into your next position? So I think that's a couple of great ways to approach a conversation about shift supervisor work. And then I guess on the other side of that coin, we should be challenging our leadership in our mills to find other ways that young engineers can get leadership experience. Shift supervisor is great experience. It's great leadership experience, but I believe that there are also other roles that young professionals can be put in to gain valuable leadership experience.
And Jack, from my perspective as a mill manager, would be very similar to that. I'm a firm believer of clarity of expectations, making sure that's clear to an individual. I think you also can find ways to get those experiences without actually being on shift work. You start off with finding projects that get these individuals working with the teams on the floor, the hourly workforce. So there's always activities and problems need to be solved. So you go and you be intentional, and you find a situation where that young professional can lead a team of hourly folks. And it may not be in shift work, it may just be a day shift. Then you give them opportunities to lead a crew just during day shift, so they can see what it's like and see the benefits and how that can help develop their career. And that could lead into the conversation. Let's go make this more permanent, maybe a 2 to 3 year stint for you. And we'll make sure we'll put you in a situation where you are going to succeed. Because it's a pretty big step coming out of college and maybe only have 1 year or 2 years experience to be put on the floor and be in charge of people who've been there. Like in Kingsport, we've got folks who've been here 40 and 50 years. So to take someone who's just right out of college, maybe 2 years of experience, and put them on the floor and say, okay, now you're in charge of folks that have been here 25, 30, 40 years. We've got to be intentional about how we set them up for success in that role.
Great comments. Kelly, anything to add on to what the Kingsport team was talking about?
Oh, sorry. Oh, I would agree with everything they say. And I know in my experience, this is a struggle. I will say this is a struggle to get the younger, newer generation to want to go into shift work. But just like they said, put a defined time on it. That tends to ease a lot of their concerns. We've seen that. We say, we'd like you to do this temporary assignment for a year. And they typically jump on it more when you have a defined time. And then again, like he said, it's those career conversations. Talk about what this can mean for them in the future. Most of the department heads that I've worked with all did a stint as a shift supervisor at some point. It's a great way to learn. You'll learn to lead a group of people that way. And then also a lot of our facilities are unionized, and working in a unionized environment is a little different. And I think there's no better way to learn the contract than to be a shift supervisor, because you've got to know the contract in and out, inside and out. But also before you even have these conversations, I would give the supervisor this advice, know your people. Not everybody wants to be a leader. So make sure you have those career conversations first before presenting a shift supervisor opportunity to someone. You may have someone on your team who doesn't ever actually want to lead people. They just want to be an individual contributor. So that may be a different conversation that person has, because they may not say, I don't mind the shift work, I just don't want to lead people. So we just need to be mindful of that too as well, that not everybody wants to be a department head or a mill manager, and that's okay too. And then that would not be the person we would want to put into a shift supervisor role, because they probably wouldn't stay, because that is not what they want to do, and that's not a future career that they're interested in.
Great comment, Kelly. Thank you very much. Okay, we're at the time where we need to do a wrap up. So just a couple things, and we're kind of out of questions anyway coming in. So a couple things. You do have 4 handouts that are attached to this webinar, the GoToWebinar product, and that is there is a Young Professional Division flyer, kind of a promotional, where you can see what the Young Professional Division is about for TAPPI. We have a handout on the Mentor Match program that we mentioned earlier, the TAPPI Mentor Match. We have the bios of all the presenters here today, so you can see a little bit more about their background. And then also a kind of a one-page summary of the tools and tips that were discussed today. And on a final note, TAPPI will send out a survey following this webinar so that we can get feedback and continuously improve the product. So with that, I want to thank the presenters very much for the great work today. I want to thank all the participants for joining today. And please give us your feedback. We'd like to make sure that we're continuously improving this process. And take care and have a wonderful day, everyone.